Do you absolutely hate networking? So many people do, but we're going to talk about what if there was a way you could love it. Welcome to another episode of The Good, Bad, and Ugly of Business. I am your host, Catryn Becker, and on this podcast, we interview successful people because behind every successful person is a mountain of failures, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we want to talk about some of those failures so that we can learn more about them. Because while a smart person can learn from their own mistakes and failures, a genius can learn from the mistakes of others. So buckle up. We've got a lot of fun talking about networking and connecting coming from the very wonderful Melissa Snow. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our talk today.
I am too. I love that you focus on networking as a point of being because it is such an important part of business. And there's so many people that tell you how to do it a certain way. There's so much marketing cookie cutter stuff. It doesn't really work for everyone.
Yeah, 100%. That's how I ended up here.
Well,
I
tell
was
us about
laughing.
that.
I was laughing when you were saying learning from other people's mistakes. I'm like, yes, please save your time and your money. Just listen to me.
Well, tell the people.
Well, I started out as a dating coach. I was a dating coach for 6 years for women exclusively. And while I was building that business, I did a lot of the things that most of us do when we are brand new in business. I hired the expensive business coaches. I joined the expensive group coaching programs. I bought the courses and the books and the all of the things. And every time I genuinely believed that was the thing that was going to move the needle in my forward in my business. Like that was the thing that I was missing. And over again, it turned out to not be the thing that was missing. And when I got out of the coaching world and started my new business, it was really based on the fact that when I looked back on my time building my coaching business, what I realized was none of those things were the things that brought me income. It wasn't because I had a beautiful website. It wasn't because I did reels on Instagram. It wasn't any of those things. It was the relationships that I had created, the connections that I had built. And that was consistently over and over again where my clients were coming from and how I was making money. And so when I started my current business, Powerful Women Rising, it was really with the intention of helping other women build businesses through connections and relationships, because that really is, I believe, the simplest and most sustainable form of business growth that there is.
I love something you said so very much, and it was so beautiful how you said it, and I want to go back to it. And that was creating connections, and then it was like almost like a slash building networks. And when I
Mhm.
hear that and I hear creation, that's such a feminine energy, whereas build is such a masculine energy. And you work exclusively with women. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on the difference between creating connections and building a network. And if you have seen similar things between the two energies there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a balance that is important. One of the things that I found when I was networking for my first business was there are networking groups. I think they're more like leads groups and referral groups than they are networking groups, but very business focused, very transactional relationships. How many people did you refer to me? How much money did I make because of you? I don't care that your mom was in the hospital. I'm just trying to figure out, like, how much money did you send me? And then there are other groups that I feel like are on the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like you almost feel like it's taboo to even talk about the fact that you have a business. Like, we're just
Mm.
here for connection and community. And like, we're all trying to pretend like we don't have businesses because we don't want to be salesy weirdos. But when I created my community, the Powerful Women Rising community, it really was because I was trying to find something that was in the middle. Because I do think that it is important, especially for women, to show up with that human element, to show up authentically, to show up and create genuine relationships. That is what we're built to do. And it's also how the most effective networking happens. At the same time, you also want to be able to do that with intention. We're not just networking because we want to make new friends or we want a community or a sisterhood. Like, all of that is important if that is the
Sure.
intention. But if you're doing it to build a business, there needs to be a balance of that authenticity and connection and genuineness with also being intentional about what you're doing. And that's how you're going to get the best results, is the mix of those two energies.
I completely agree. And it is about being in the middle. It's about the harmony between the two and how they work together, because follow up is kind of a more masculine sort of energy of, it's an action, it's a doing, but to have the moment when you're in there and you can just be with the other person and creating those connections is so important. And I'm pretty sure I know exactly what networking groups you were referring to by your examples.
Well, and to your point about follow-up, that's a great example of finding that balance, because people ask me about follow-up all the time, because it is like one of people's least favorite things about networking. And for a lot of people, one of the most time-consuming things. But if we look at follow-up, that's the masculine energy of like, okay, now we need to do something with these connections that we've made, right? We went to the thing, we met the people, we like the people like us. Now, how do I actually like leverage that into something for my business? That's very masculine energy. But you can do that follow up intentionally with the feminine energy of like, how do I follow up with them authentically? How do I follow up with them in a way that is just providing value to them? Like, hey, it was so great to meet you a couple days ago at such and such event. I remember you mentioned that you were really struggling with this, and I just saw this article that was about the same thing. I thought I'd share it with you. Hopefully you find it helpful, right? That's the more like relational connection way of doing it, but you're still doing it intentionally. And that's the balance.
It almost feels like in today's world, we have lost or forgotten, is more, I think, a better word for it. It's not lost, it's forgotten, of how to connect authentically and how to interact with one another. I was working with a woman a couple of months ago who I use Calendly as a scheduling link for client meetings, for scheduling this podcast, for all of the different things, because I find that it's so easy for everyone to find a time. And I was working with a woman who didn't use Calendly and had used it with me and was like, I'd like to set this up. Could you help me? Absolutely, of course. So we're working together and she's like, well, then how do I send this to people? I was like, well, I don't understand your question. She's like, I just feel like it'll be so rude to ask them to schedule it themselves. And I kind of had to sit there with a minute because I thought, I've never had this thought before. That they didn't know how to interact and have those kind of authentic conversations. Like, where did we forget this along the way?
Yeah, I don't know. I want to blame COVID because I want to blame COVID for everything. But I mean, my husband is a high school principal, and when their students came back after being home for a year and a half, 2 years, depending where you were in the world, he used to refer to them as feral. Like these children like are feral children. And I feel like a little bit that's what happened to us too. Like we forgot how to people and now we're like kind of relearning how to people. But I also think a big part of it, it becomes more complicated in business because we have all of these messages from all of these influencer business coaches, all of these like, I know the 5 steps to that you need to take to make $10 million in 10
Mm.
seconds, people. And we hear that and it makes us get like so weird. Like, I feel like that's part of the reason that networking has gotten so weird is because people have stopped being authentic.
Sure.
People think they need to be a certain way, they need to show up a certain way, to look a certain way, to act a certain way. And in order to be taken seriously, or in order for people to want to connect with them or to refer people to them. And so many people are so worried about like showing up in the right way that that has taken away that kind of human connection element from it.
It's so true. And I think even like before COVID, I started out in engineering, which is a very male dominated field. And so engineers don't really network per se. Like we go to industry events or conventions, and there'll be some sort of mixer kind of thing. But it's not quite the same as when I became an engineer and was more intentionally networking. But I think also Me Too played a part in that, of men all of a sudden not knowing how to interact with women,
Mm-hmm.
like what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And I think just even going back and like watching movies from like the 90s, like the things that were put out in movies would never be put out today.
Yeah,
And you
100%.
think about how fast our society has changed and evolved. No wonder no one knows what to do.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's different. Networking in a co-ed group versus an all women group or event is also a very different experience. It's a very different energy. And I think a lot of it too comes back to the intention of networking. A
Mm.
lot of people think, and generally this is a more masculine trait, that a lot of people think networking, the purpose of networking is to get clients or to make money, right? To grow your business financially with referrals or whatever that is. I say the purpose of networking is to build your network. And there are a lot of different roles that need to be filled in your network. Sometimes it's just the people that you're going to call to say, this is really hard. And they're going to
Right.
say, yeah, this is really hard, but keep going. You got this. Sometimes it's the people that you want to bounce ideas off of. Sometimes it is people that are going to refer to you and you're going to refer back. Sometimes it's people you're going to collaborate with projects on. And sometimes it is just people that are like your social media friends and you always like their stuff and they always like your stuff. And that's just what your relationship is. All of those different roles in your network are important. And so when you're out networking, that really is your goal, is building your network. And so when we walk into networking events or groups or even just like a dinner party with the thought of like, okay, who here wants to buy my stuff? Or
Mm.
like, okay, who here might know somebody who wants to buy my stuff? Like that's a very different energy. And you are going to approach that quote unquote connection in a very different way than if you were walking into the event thinking like, I'm just here to grow my network. Like, let's see what these people have to offer. Let's see what her area of expertise is. Let's see what she values. Let's see if we vibe. Then you show up in a really different, like more authentic, easier to relate to way.
And I'm sure, imposter syndrome probably has a lot to do with it as well. And if you really think about imposter syndrome, if you're being authentic, then you don't feel like an imposter. It's when we're
Mhm.
trying to show up as someone other than our completely core authentic self, when we're putting on a mask of something, that's when we're being the imposter. And I know men experience imposter syndrome as well, but it seems to affect women in a much more stronger way.
Mhm.
And I know you work only with women. So how is this something that you help them to overcome through the work that you guys do together?
Yeah, absolutely. I just did a podcast episode on my podcast recently about imposter syndrome. And it's funny because anyone who's struggling with imposter syndrome feels like they are the only one in the room feeling it.
Mm.
And I guarantee you, everyone in the room is feeling it to some degree in some way, no matter what room you're in. Because we think like, oh, once I'm making six figures or seven figures, or oh, this woman's so successful, she's like got a whole team underneath her. There's no way she feels imposter syndrome. She does, probably all the time. It just shows up in a very different way. Um, and part of it is with imposter syndrome and many other aspects of networking is continuing to do it and continuing to practice.
Mm.
I read a book that was about social anxiety. I can't remember the name of it now, but it was written by a woman who's a psychologist. And she was saying that people often come to her saying, I want you to help me get over my anxiety so that I can go live my life. And she would always tell them it's actually the opposite. Like you need to go live your life in order to get over your anxiety. And it's very similar with imposter syndrome. We think we need to wait until we feel super confident that, like, I can help everybody. I know all the things. I know everything there is to know about business. And then I'll go out and start meeting people and introducing myself and networking. And it's actually the total opposite. Like, the first time you go out, especially if you've come from like corporate or a 9 to 5 job, and this is your first time as an entrepreneur, the first time you go out and meet people and they say, what do you do? You're going to like trip all over yourself, or you're going to say something really weird. Like, well, I'm trying to build a coaching business, or like, I'm a baby coach, or like whatever other weird things we say.
It's so true. It's
But the
so true.
more that you do it, the more natural it feels, the more like now that I've said it 1,000 times, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a business relationship strategist. But the first time I was like, nobody knows what a business relationship strategist is. And is that made up? And did I just make that up? And does anybody want a business relationship strategist? And so, well, I would introduce myself in like a very strange way, I'm certain. But the more that you practice, the more comfortable that you get, and the more it starts to feel like your actual identity and not just like this weird thing that you're pretending to be. And so practice it's probably one of the best, if not the best anecdotes to uh antidotes, not anecdotes. That's a different thing. As soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, that does not sound like the right word. Antidotes to imposter syndrome, I think.
Well, and I love the word practice, and it reminds me of like the medical field. They call it their practice. And on one hand, that's terrifying.
Right.
But on the other hand, we have this idea that we have to be perfect the first time. And thank goodness we don't have that thought when we're babies and we try walking for the first time and we fall and be like, this walking thing, not for me.
Not doing that again.
You guys have a good time with it. I'm just gonna sit right here. But everything should be called our practice.
Absolutely. And it's always an evolution too. It's like the way I networked a year ago is not the way that I network now. And the way I networked 6 years ago when I started my business is not the way that I network now. And that's okay. It doesn't mean I was doing it wrong before. It just means things have evolved and grown and I've practiced. And one of the things that I really love, I run these virtual speed networking events for women. And it's a really good place for people to have an opportunity to just like practice talking about themselves, practice sharing what they do, practice sharing like what sets you apart from every other realtor in the world. Why would someone hire you as opposed to the 5 other realtors that are in your networking group? And that is really it's helpful, especially for the people who show up month after month after month to those calls, because you can see the evolution of how they talk about what they do, how they share what they do. And the more comfortable they become, the more they're able to get away from their elevator pitch or their 30-second commercial or whatever their like scripted thing that they're memorizing and reciting robotically is, and just like speak from their heart about what they do. And that's an important part of the practice and the evolution too, because you find different ways to talk about what you do. And sometimes you're going to do it in a way that's like, oh, it's weird. Let me not ever do it that way again. And other times you're going to do it and you're going to be like, what did I just say? Because that was really good.
I completely relate to that. I was literally in a group yesterday where I started to say what it was that I did, and I didn't like how I was saying it. So I literally went, like I'm taking those back and just did it again. And it was kind of a fun icebreaker moment within the virtual group because it really got everyone's attention and they really were listening to the next part that I said, which is great. That's what needs to happen. So, but I want to also talk about the difference between networking in person versus networking virtually. And, you run this virtual group. Tell me more about why you chose virtual versus in person and kind of how you overcome any maybe perceived hurdles that people have about the difference between the two.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of benefits to both. There are things, and I do both. There are things that I love about in-person networking that don't exist with virtual networking. Obviously, most of us are more comfortable having a conversation with a screen. Like right now, I don't feel awkward, like, oh, I'm talking to my computer. Like it feels like you're just sitting here, which also comes with practice. And there's a lot about virtual networking that I think is cool in terms of being able to connect with people that you wouldn't otherwise be able to connect with. On our last call last month, we had 76 women on that call from 9 different countries. Like I'm probably never going to network with someone from Nigeria in person, right? Like I ain't going there. I don't think, never say never, but it's not on my list this year. And so to be able to network with people from all over is super cool. It gives an opportunity for women who have babies at home or who are homeschooling or are still doing their 9 to 5, but they can break away for a lunch break to go do networking, to connect with those women who you may not otherwise be able to connect with in person. So I really like that aspect of it. And I find that virtual is a lot less threatening for people who are nervous about networking, people who think they don't like networking, people who are more on the like introverted or shy, or they think that they're just awkward. I joke about it, but I'm actually very serious when I say, like, if we're in person and we're having a conversation and it's like really weird and like a lot of work and you're not responding to me and I'm saying stuff that I think is funny and you're not laughing. And it's just like, those like very conversations that you're like, how do I get out of here? But we're sitting in a coffee shop, like that's much harder for me to get out of. If we're like in a breakout room or we're like on a Zoom and I'm like, oh no, my internet's acting really weird. So sorry, bye.
Bad
Like,
cell
I'm
connection.
kidding, but I'm also not kidding. But I think like, I mean, that's a dramatic example, but I do think that being able to do it this way, I mean, it's a time saver, right? I didn't have to drive 20 minutes. I didn't have to pay $8 for a cup of coffee and then pay $20 to drive. I mean, spend 20 minutes driving home. So that helps. But I also think it's just like, if you have anxiety about it, if you feel nervous about it, if you feel uncomfortable about it, to me, it feels, and the feedback I've gotten from a lot of women is it doesn't feel as intimidating to get onto a screen full of women as it does to walk into a room full of women where you think
Mm.
like everybody's going to know each other. Everybody's going to look at me and be like, oh, who's that new girl? Nobody's going to want to talk to me. And then I'm going to have to like stand in the corner all weird because no one wants to talk to me. Like all of that stuff is taken away when you're in the virtual world. And I think that can be really helpful for a lot of people.
That is such a good point, and thank you so much for really putting a bow on that. There is something about walking in and being like, where do I sit? Or what do I wear? At least with Zoom, I could be wearing like Ronald McDonald shoes underneath here and you wouldn't know. But so I really like that point about it. And I think there's definitely something, and it brings up a lot of trauma, I think, from our childhood of where to sit in the cafeteria.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason that there are so many movies that have scenes with someone sitting by themselves in the cafeteria, because it is
Mm-hmm.
something that everyone has experienced at some point. And that comes back to haunt us even as adults of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to sit by myself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
And this
you
is
can talk
something I
more.
tell people a lot with networking events is like there are different structures to different meetings, different groups, different events, if we're talking like formal networking. And so one of the things for me has been really important is to find like what is the format that I like that makes me feel the most comfortable, because when you feel the most comfortable, you're going to be able to show up the most authentically. Some people love the networking events that have no structure. That's just like happy hour, 80 people, get a drink, mingle. That is like my worst nightmare. I will do whatever I can to avoid walking into that room because I'm just not the personality that is going to walk up to like a group of people I don't know and be like, hi, I'm Melissa. What's your name? Oh, nice to meet you. Like that sounds terrifying to me. But you give me a room where it's like, okay, sit at this table. I'm going to give you 8 minutes to talk to the women at this table about this topic. I'll do that all day long and I'll be super comfortable and confident and authentic doing that because at least I have like a little bit of structure. So finding what works for you and what feels most comfortable for you is very helpful. And for a lot of people, that is virtual. For some people, it's not virtual. So it's very similar to dating, where I say, like, you can't just go on one date and be like, yeah, I didn't like him. I'm not dating anymore. It's like, okay, there's probably a few others that are different from him. So let's try them before we just swear the whole thing off. And you and I were talking before we started recording about not so great networking experiences. And I think that happens to a lot of people. We go to networking events. It's not pleasant. It's not fun. Nobody talks to us. We sit by ourselves, or we're like assaulted by people trying to give us their business cards and sell us their stuff. And then we're like, I hate networking. I'm never going again.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you get the sell to join the networking group really hard. And it's like, but you don't even know who I am or what I do.
Right.
You just
Yeah.
want a warm body.
Yeah. And you literally will not let me out of this room until I join.
You are held hostage here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so we've talked a lot about the differences of formatting and networking and all the different things. Let's talk kind of before we wrap up, just a bit more in depth about the virtual speed networking group that you host. What does that look like? What's the format? What can someone expect by joining that? Because I'm pretty sure I'm gonna come check some out. No, I'm
It's
not sure.
super
I
fun.
will check some out. This is yeah. I don't know why I made that not clear.
Edit that out. She's coming for sure,
I'm
everyone.
coming. I'll be there.
Yeah, so I actually run an online community for female entrepreneurs that's called the Powerful Women Rising Community. That's a membership community. We do member only networking calls, we do mastermind calls, we do some business strategies, some mindset coaching. And then once a month, I run a virtual speed networking event that is open to everyone. So that's not Powerful Women Rising Community exclusive. They generally come. But it's open to anyone who wants to come. We do it on the second Tuesday of every, or the second Thursday of every month at 11 Mountain Time. It's $5 plus whatever fees Eventbrite is charging that day. I have a promo code for people who can come the first time at no cost. And I can share that with your listeners for sure. But it's an hour and I try to move really quickly because I've been that person that shows up to the Zoom thing that you think is going to be really valuable. And actually, it's like a 45-minute commercial for their thing. And then they're like, oh, by the way, I'll put you in a breakout room for 5 minutes. And you're like, thanks. That's not what I came for. So try to get you in a breakout room as soon as I can. And generally we have time for 3 or 4 breakout rooms. So you'll go into a breakout room with 3, 4, 5 other female entrepreneurs. And I give you guys a topic to talk about. I try to find something that is kind of in between the like super businessy and the also super personal. Like I've been to ones where it's like we go in a breakout room and talk about like, if you were an animal, what would you be? I'm like, I literally don't care what your answer is and why are we talking about this? So try to give you questions that like help you know, get to know the other people as humans, but also like, let's not pretend like we don't have businesses. And so we do that 3 or 4 times. I have a form where everybody submits whatever contact information that they want to share. I send all that information out after the call so that people can connect with the people that they met on the call that they want to connect with further. And, like I said, I have people who come every once in a while. I have same people who come every single month. And it's just a really fun opportunity, like I said, to practice networking in a very safe, non-judgmental environment. I am very real, very authentic. I think it was like maybe the last event or the one before that like halfway through the event, I realized that my sweater was on backwards. Like I was just kind of messing with my shirt and I realized the tag was right there. And I was like mid call and I'm like, oh, my sweater is on backwards. Let me just turn it around. And so it's like, you don't have to put your mask on, your like successful businesswoman mask on to come. Just come as you are. Everyone is super supportive and kind and fun and just genuinely wants to help each other and support each other and see each other succeed. And so it's a really, really fun event. It's like my favorite day every month.
That totally sounds like my jam. And I hope all the listeners heard that there's going to be a promo code in the show notes for you able to join the first time for free. That is amazing and so generous. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for that, Melissa.
absolutely. I hope to see you and all of your listeners there.
You will definitely see me there. So I hope the listeners also take advantage of it because it's so true. And, it's something that I see on different, Facebook groups and things that I'm part of women not knowing how to make friends with other women.
Mm-hmm.
I think, as we grow and evolve that sometimes it's hard to let go of existing relationships or they just change and then we're left with kind of this hole and we don't know how to fill it. And it's a whole thing. So being
Mm-hmm.
able to come to a group that's just there to support one another and, you know, it, it's interesting to have a networking group where the questions aren't around necessarily your elevator pitch.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really
No,
love that strategy.
we don't love the elevator pitch. I have several podcast episodes about that. In fact, I think my most downloaded episode is called The Elevator Pitch is Dead.
Ah, it's perfect. It's perfect. Well, and especially in a virtual world, we're not in elevators. We don't need an elevator pitch.
Right. Right. Excellent.
Oh my gosh. Well, this has been so much fun. So please share with everyone how they can learn more about you, how they can connect with you, how they can join your community, your networking group, all the different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is called Powerful Women Rising. So my website is powerfulwomenrising.com. My Instagram, I'm at Powerful Women Rising. My podcast is called Powerful Women Rising. You can find the virtual speed networking events on my website. You can also just go to my Eventbrite profile, which again is Powerful Women Rising. I wish I was getting $1 for every time I said that. And that will show you like all the upcoming dates, and you can just register for whichever one works for you.
Perfect. And all of that information will be in the show notes as well. But this was really, really fun, Melissa. Thank you so much for
Yes.
being a
Thank you so
guest.
much for having me. It was awesome.
And to the listeners, I know you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. For the male listeners, please make sure to share this with your female friends and counterparts. And for the women, I really hope to see you there at one of these events. Make sure you comment on this episode. Let us know that you're coming. And until next time, have a great one, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.